Hi, and welcome back. So in this episode, we will go through some updates that Mural put in place around its voting feature. I've already recorded an episode about MIRO versus Mural voting, so you'll find a link into this so you can still go back and find some of those differences. But in this episode, we will specifically look at some updates. We will look at three things. One is the new functionality to constrain the voting inside Mural to a certain space or to a certain type of item. Second, how to use this to vote on clusters. So when you have clusters of sticky notes, how do you prevent manually counting votes? And then we will look at gradients of agreement. That is an idea that, again, it doesn't simply apply to Mural, it's just a facilitation technique to give more dimensions to the voting for the group. And so let's assume that you have like a list of items, and I'm gonna take this from this random sentence generator, and I'm gonna show you a little trick. When you paste stuff, if you click this little button here, you can change that, you can switch its type from text to the little post-it note, and now they all look kind of squished, but you can also arrange them in a grid, and that helps you kind of bring in that content into a visualizable, votable form. When you start a voting session inside Mural, you will be asked for the name of the session that you're voting on. Avoid putting in random words or voting one, because when you have subsequent voting sessions, it'll be confusing to find out what did we vote for. Instead, putting a meaningful purpose of what the vote is for. And then here you can select the number of votes for one person who can vote. And down here, here's the news. You can select what to vote on. And so in this case, where you only have sticky notes, so you must select one of those items in order to go next. So if you go with sticky note, then you can start. And if you leave it like that, entire canvas will be as it was a few months ago. With selected section, you basically can now enter this little grid here to include or exclude certain notes or certain elements. So here we go. You can now click Start, which says that the voting session is running, so you can begin to vote. When you share a link by default, be mindful that you're sharing a link for members and guests. What that means is that Mural will ask you to log in, or that person that you're sharing it. You need to share the Mural with visitors. Copy that link will allow you or that person to edit and participate in your work. They've added this nifty description of what is the difference between guests and visitors. Kudos on that, real good user interface. When the visitors begin voting, they will be forced to use the constrained space that we specified in the voting setup. The rest remains pretty much the same as it was. One of the major differences with MIRO is that in Mural you can see that someone has voted and how many votes they have left. This is a fantastic feature that allows the facilitator to gain visibility on where the group is at. And so right now we have that most valuable ideas for our stakeholders. But maybe you also want to add another dimension to all this. And so you can add another voting session. And maybe the prompt here will be, what do we think is the most valuable idea for our CEO? Wouldn't that be a fun one to run with a group? We've selected the entire canvas. In this case, this is the old behavior where visitors could vote on anything. This is an example where there was like a voting session and someone accidentally voted on the frame. And then I see that I'm the only one voting. Everyone else has voted. So end the voting session. So now up here we have the different ideas. This hasn't really changed. So if you have clusters of ideas and you went ahead and voted like we did before, just on the sticky notes, you will end up in a situation where, like here we have different areas, and each area, each post-it received votes, and we need to manually sum them up. Some votes will have to be summed up. So if this is a cluster down here, you'd have to count and manually do that. This is a trivial example, so it's not a huge deal. When you have like a lot more ideas and a lot more people, this can be painful. I think there is a better way to do that. So you might think, oh, you can use the drawing symbols to create those clusters. And maybe you can have the group do that. The problem with those is that you cannot vote on those areas. So those drawings are something that if you start a voting session, you won't be able to find them, you won't be able to vote on. So my suggestion is, instead of using those drawing tools, I would just use a little shape like this. So you would bring in this little circle, and this is our cluster. If you proceed creating those shapes and you go ahead voting, you will find a little surprise. Mural prevents voting on shapes that do not contain names. So this is a great opportunity for the group to name those clusters. As a facilitator, I suggest not to spend too much time wordsmithing the names of those clusters. And so giving names like cluster 1, 2, and 3 might be enough to move on the group. Participants can still put multiple votes on the same cluster. In this case, when you click on a sticky note inside a cluster, that shape will get the vote. And of course, you can click on the singular sticky notes that live outside a cluster. When the facilitator ends the voting session, you'll see the familiar voting results. The shape is a little bit opaque, so it's hard to read the text, but you can still make it out at the top of the highlight votes option. Final tip around voting online inside Mural. Imagine you have those 3 ideas. You could start a voting session for people to vote on their favorite idea, or you could use gradient of agreements. I learned about it in Kainer's book, The Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making, a real Bible for any facilitator. I created a little template that I have inside my Mural. It's pretty straightforward. The idea of the gradient is to give more dimensions than just a yes or no. You are going to give 3 votes per person because there are 3 ideas. Just remind the participants to put their vote on the sticky note that represents the level in the gradient of agreement. So this is it. I hope you learned something new. I hope this was useful to you. Leave a thumbs up if you liked this video. Leave a comment if you have some question or specific feedback. You can follow me on Twitter or find me on LinkedIn to find out when I release new videos. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.